The first thing I want to ask you, you've had the opportunity to speak with so many great athletes and discuss their moments of greatness, intensity, triumph. What has that taught you about greatness within yourself?
Good question. Look, I think, yeah, I mean, the great thing about talking to athletes, right, about greatness is when they describe it, you can see it. Like there's usually archival footage, you can see it on YouTube. So it's cinematic, it's physical. But, really what they talk about most often is emotionally and mentally. Like, what was I going through? How did I, separate that part of myself? And so I think those are things those are relatable. Scoring 45 points and 15 rebounds, etc., not exactly relatable. But I think the idea of, the aspiration of greatness, of intentionality, like that is something that we can all relate to, and something that's, I certainly have felt in my life.
So, on the point of being able to relate to this as an average person, do you think that there's a difference as far as mindset with achieving your highest self with professional athletes that obviously do this, beyond what an average person can do and what the average person does within their own mindset?
Yeah, no, I think there is, because again, once you get past the sort of spectacle of it, like, doing it on a big field in front of thousands of people, the process of it. So, one of the things that athletes talk a lot about is, yeah, like we're talking about this moment in a great playoff game or, a high profile game. But, that moment is the product of all the hard work, all the repetition, all the process, the blood, sweat, and tears that goes into it. Like what happens on the field in the Super Bowl is actually the product of the repetitions in April or May on the practice field. And so I think, again, like that's something we can all, uh, emulate in our own lives, which is like the hard work, the discipline, the devotion, and then hopefully that produces itself in that moment, somewhere down the line. But I think the process is actually the part that is very admirable and very replicable.
So, for you, obviously, having these conversations throughout, did you notice a difference as far as how greatness is achieved between men and women?
Yeah, I only recently, as I've started talking more about this, I started to notice like, four out of the five men that I interviewed, they talked a lot about the expectation, the pressure, the scrutiny that comes with fame, and obviously so much success, and how that, like their ability to sort of manage that and contain that, I guess, and then perform. That was consistent to their story. Then when you look at Katie Ledecky and Alex Morgan, who are part of this year's, both of them talked about their moments came early in their careers, no expectations. Nobody even knew who they were. Katie Ledecky was 15 years old. She was a sophomore in high school when she showed up at the 2012 games. She talked about being in the green room and seeing Michael Phelps and being like, oh my God, like not knowing how to react to him. Alex talked about like her first start. She's like, half my teammates didn't even know who I was. And so I thought that was interesting. Just like, for those women, it was about like having the freedom to be the best version of themselves, not having the weight of expectations. I don't know. I don't want to say that if we did 100 more, that would necessarily be the case. And Usain Bolt was kind of like the outlier. But, certainly something that, at least in this test case of 7, we saw some trends.
So, you obviously worked with Kobe Bryant to create the Showtime documentary Muse. Was that sort of the starting point of your curiosity about this subject, or what made you want to dig into that particular portion of a mindset?
Yeah, no, Kobe was definitely like the first, and probably to this day, most intense and most intimate experience working with an athlete. I think certainly of that stature. Yeah, and it definitely did start. I think just specifically this, because I remember I'm a big Celtics fan and watched like Kobe torch the. I mean,
I'm
yeah,
born and
like
raised in LA,
okay,
so
but like that was one of the things where Kobe and I really like bonded, right? Like we're kind of the same. We're definitely the same generation, same age, And like, so we had the shared experience. I mean, he's a Laker great. I'm a diehard fan, but like, at least back in the 80s, had the shared experience of, I'm a Celtics fan, he's a Lakers fan, watching these two teams battle each other. So, I remembered also later in his career, just like how many times he just crushed the Celtics, like crushed all my dreams. And so I thought like, well, maybe that's what he considers one of his, he's, very like, um, student of the game, like knows how much that rivalry means. Or, he scored 81 points against the Raptors. He scored 61 3/4 against the Mavericks once. So I thought like maybe that's one of his greatest games. But he talked about a game, I think it was like a pretty obscure game against Tracy McGrady. I don't know, like early in his career, it was a regular season game. And he said, no, that was my best game. And he kind of told me why. And I just thought like, oh, that's interesting. It's, again, I would have never predicted that, in a guy 20-year career like that he would say this nothing game like that, no stakes, was his best game ever. So, LeBron subsequently was the next one, like working a few years later, similar, like not the one in Cleveland winning the championship, not the first championship with the Heat. It was a playoff game against the Celtics, I hate to say, but like, it wasn't the one you would predict. And so I thought that was really cool.
So for you, what has been sort of the outlier of greatness, that discipline, but that you can start instilling in even as children? Because one of the questions we often kind of ask is someone reaching their full potential, and how can you pull that out of them? And so discipline is a portion of that, but is there something else that you detected that goes hand in hand in that, or something that you can instill in children so that it carries on with them?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think, so discipline being one, I'd say devotion is the other. It's like the lingo I always use. I mean, the company that I started and produces all this content is called Religion of Sports. So, like when you talk to Tom Brady or Kelly Slater, they'll tell you, I was, these experiences remind me that I was put on this planet to do this thing. I love this. Yes, the fame, certainly the fortune, the experiences are amazing and all of that. But I'm at my best when I'm doing this thing. I love it. And so, I fortunately, as a child, was raised by my parents to pursue that, which I love. Like, the big joke with South Asian parents is, oh, you have to become a physician or an engineer. Those are the two paths. And my parents were not like that. They saw I had a love of sports, so they pushed me towards that. And so I think that's something that, sadly, we don't do a lot with our children. We try to make them get the best grades or go to the best schools or whatever. But actually like this nurturing of those things that they love, because otherwise you're not going to do it. You're not going to have that discipline. You're not going to stick at it. It's not easy. Greatness is tough to accomplish. And even when you do, it's fleeting. So I think that just like that passion for it is really important.
And sort of wrapping up, you mentioned your company, and the combination of sports and faith is one that we don't necessarily always hear about, especially within the terms and the context that you're putting out content with. So I want to know how you came to that intersection, and what I know what the response has been, but overall, what has been the response from when you initially started it to where we are now in 2020?
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's very intuitive. I grew up in a very spiritual family, I would say. So I don't think of it as like two disconnected things. I don't sort of talk too much about religion and sports. It's really not about evangelical athletes or which is an important topic and I think an important part of many athletes' lives. But the idea of sports as a religion, sports is about community, sports is about mythology, sports is about human potential. All of these things that spiritual and wisdom traditions talk about, you can actually experience in sports, either as an athlete or just as a fan. Like when I go to a game, I see people of every type of background, ethnicity, lifestyle, socioeconomic class, etc. And we have a shared experience around our Celtics or our Lakers or the holy war that these two teams are a part of. And so I think that's how I see sports. And I think most people, like when I start talking about this, are like, oh yeah, I get it. I grew up in LA. I know what it feels like. I bleed the Dodger blue or whatever it is. And so I think, and it's people all across the planet. Like it's, people in South America, it's big teams, small teams, big towns, small, villages, etc. They understand what sports means. It provides meaning. So I think that's, for me, it's sort of like, I feel like I started out as this one man evangelist, but now there's, a cult that's part of this religion of sports. So it's pretty great.